There is a strange moment that happens when you look at someone else's life and suddenly feel disappointed with your own. Maybe you're scrolling through your phone. Someone you went to school with just bought a house. Another person announces an engagement. Someone younger than you has built a successful business. A friend posts pictures from another country. And for a few seconds, nothing in your own life has actually changed. You still have the same job, the same relationships, the same bank account, the same abilities you had 30 seconds ago. Yet somehow, you feel worse. A thought quietly appears. I'm falling behind. Behind whom? And perhaps more importantly, behind what? Because there is no universal schedule for a human life. There is no official age when you must become successful. No deadline for finding love. No correct year for buying a home. No universal moment when you are supposed to finally understand what you're doing with your life. And yet many of us carry an invisible timeline everywhere we go. By 25, I should have figured things out. By 30, I should be financially stable. By 35, I should own something. By 40, I should have achieved more than this. Nobody necessarily gave us this exact schedule. We assembled it. A little from our parents, a little from our culture, a little from friends, and increasingly, a great deal from watching other people's lives. The problem is that comparison rarely uses fair data. Imagine two runners in a race. One began 10 minutes earlier. One is running downhill. One has trained for years. The other recently recovered from an injury. But you ignore all of that and compare only one thing. Where are they right now? That is often how we compare lives. You see someone's position. You don't see their starting point. You see the promotion. You don't see the connections, timing, sacrifices, failures, or years that came before it. You see the marriage. You don't see what happens when the photographs end. You see the successful company. You don't see the previous businesses that failed. You see the beautiful apartment. You don't see the debt. And sometimes, of course, the person really is doing extraordinarily well. But even then, their progress doesn't automatically mean your failure. Two people can be succeeding at the same time while standing in completely different places. Your brain, however, doesn't always interpret comparison this calmly. Humans are deeply social creatures. For most of our evolutionary history, understanding our position inside a group mattered. Who was respected? Who had resources? Who had allies? Who was excluded? Social information could affect survival, so the mind became remarkably attentive to status. Modern life gives that ancient sensitivity something it never had before, an almost unlimited number of people to compare yourself with. You can wake up in a perfectly ordinary bedroom and, within 5 minutes, compare your income with a millionaire, your appearance with a professional model, your relationship with someone's honeymoon, your productivity with an entrepreneur's highlight reel, your fitness with an athlete, your intelligence with an expert who has studied one subject for 20 years. And then wonder why your ordinary Tuesday feels inadequate. This creates an impossible game. Because the comparison target keeps changing. You compare your career with the person who has the best career, your body with the person who has the best body, your relationship with the person who appears to have the best relationship, your lifestyle with the person taking the most beautiful vacations. You are not comparing yourself with one real human being. You are comparing yourself with a fictional person assembled from the strongest parts of hundreds of different lives. No actual person can compete with that person, including you. But there is another psychological trap hidden inside the feeling of being behind. We often mistake visibility for normality. If you repeatedly see 27-year-olds building million-dollar companies, your mind may begin treating extraordinary success as an ordinary expectation. If your feed constantly shows expensive homes, international travel, perfect bodies, promotions, weddings, and achievements, those things begin to feel common. Then your real environment looks strangely unimpressive. The extraordinary becomes normal, and normal begins to feel like failure. This is one reason milestones can become emotionally dangerous. A birthday arrives. Instead of simply becoming 1 year older, you perform an audit. Where am I? What have I achieved? Who is ahead of me? What should have happened by now? And suddenly age stops being a number. It becomes evidence in a case against yourself. You begin measuring your real life against an imaginary version of where you believe you should be. Psychologists sometimes describe this gap in terms of discrepancies between the actual self and the ideal or ought self. There is who you are. there is who you want to become, and then there is the person you believe you are supposed to have become already. That last one can be especially painful, because aspiration says, I want to grow, but the invisible timeline says, I should already be there. One creates direction, the other creates shame, and shame rarely makes the journey easier. It makes you rush, it makes you panic. It makes you choose goals because they look correct from the outside rather than because they actually belong to you. You may chase a promotion you don't want, enter a relationship because everyone else is settling down, buy things to prove that you're progressing, stay in a career you dislike because changing direction would make you feel even further behind. And slowly, something ironic happens. You become so afraid of being late to someone else's life that you stop asking whether you're building your own. Perhaps the problem was never that you were behind. Perhaps the problem was accepting a race without ever asking who chose the finish line. And once you realize that the finish line may not even be yours, another question becomes unavoidable. Where did your definition of a successful life come from? Most people never consciously design one. They inherit it. Study something respectable. Find a stable career. Earn more money. Find a partner. Buy a home. Build a family. Keep moving upward. None of these things are inherently wrong. For many people, they create deeply meaningful lives. The problem begins when a possibility quietly becomes a requirement. You stop asking, do I want this? And begin asking, why don't I have this yet? That small change transforms desire into obligation, and obligation creates a clock. Imagine someone who is 32 and single. Perhaps they are genuinely happy. They have close friendships, interesting work, freedom, a life they largely enjoy. Then 3 friends get married within 1 year. Suddenly, being single feels different. Nothing about their actual Tuesday morning changed, but the meaning of their life did. Now they're not simply single, they're still single. That one word contains an entire timeline. Still. Still renting, still figuring things out, still working that job, still haven't started the business, still don't know what you want. Language quietly turns your present into evidence that something is late. And once you believe you're late, urgency appears. Urgency can be useful when a building is burning. It becomes dangerous when you're designing a life. Because rushed decisions often optimize for relief rather than meaning. You don't choose the relationship because it's healthy. You choose it because being alone feels like falling behind. You don't take the job because the work matters to you. You take it because the title makes your life look more successful. You don't buy the expensive thing because you need it. You buy it because it provides visible evidence that you're moving forward. The external milestone temporarily quiets the internal fear. I must be doing okay. Look what I've achieved. But reassurance built on comparison has a serious weakness. It expires. Someone else earns more. Someone buys something bigger. Someone reaches the next milestone first, and the race begins again. This is why feeling behind cannot always be solved by moving faster. Sometimes speed makes the problem worse. Because if you never question the scoreboard, every achievement simply moves you to the next comparison. The Stoics understood something remarkably relevant here. They repeatedly warned against building your sense of worth around things that depend heavily on fortune and other people's judgment. Status changes, money changes, reputation changes, other people's opinions change. Even circumstances you worked extremely hard to create can disappear. This doesn't mean you shouldn't pursue meaningful goals. It means you should be careful about using external milestones as measurements of your value. Epictetus drew a distinction between what is up to us and what is not. You can influence your career, but you cannot guarantee when an opportunity appears. You can become a loving partner, but you cannot command another person to arrive at a specific age. You can manage money responsibly, but you cannot control every economic event. You can work seriously toward a goal, but you cannot force reality to respect your preferred timeline. This is where the idea of being behind starts becoming strange. Behind implies that there is a schedule. A schedule implies that the events were supposed to happen at specific times. But much of life depends upon variables no individual controls completely. Imagine planting 2 identical trees. One receives more sunlight. One experiences a difficult winter. One grows quickly for several years. The other grows slowly. Then conditions change. Would you look at the smaller tree and call it a failure because it wasn't the same height at the same age? Probably not. You would understand that growth depends upon conditions. Yet we often refuse ourselves the same complexity. We reduce years of experience, luck, opportunity, health, family circumstances, mistakes, responsibilities, personality, and timing into one brutal sentence. I should be further ahead. Further ahead according to what information? Maybe you spent years surviving something another person never experienced. Maybe you supported people while someone else could focus entirely on themselves. Maybe you chose stability during a period when stability was exactly what you needed. Maybe you made mistakes. Maybe you lost time. Maybe some opportunities really did pass you by. Accepting this doesn't require pretending every decision was perfect. It simply means understanding that regret and self-condemnation are not the same thing. You can look backward and say, I wish I had started earlier, without turning that sentence into, I have ruined my life. One is information. The other is a verdict. And verdicts have a strange way of becoming prisons. If you believe you're already hopelessly behind, why begin now? If you believe everyone else has an impossible head start, why try? If you believe your best years are gone, why invest in the years that remain? The belief that you are behind can eventually create the exact behavior that keeps you stuck. You feel ashamed, so you avoid. You avoid, so nothing changes. Nothing changes. So the belief becomes stronger. I'm falling even further behind, and the loop continues. Perhaps this is why the most useful comparison is not always between your life and someone else's. It may be between your current direction and the direction you actually want to travel. Not, where should I be by now, but, given where I am now, what direction is worth moving in? That question doesn't require you to rewrite the past. It doesn't require pretending you have unlimited time. It simply returns something incredibly important to you: the next move. Because you cannot go back and start at 20. But you can decide what 35 looks like. You cannot change what you didn't understand 5 years ago, but you can use what you understand today. And perhaps a meaningful life is not built by arriving everywhere on time. Perhaps it is built by repeatedly noticing when you're traveling in the wrong direction and having the courage to turn. So how do you stop feeling behind? Perhaps the first step is to recognize that the feeling itself is not always evidence. Feeling late does not necessarily mean you are late. Feeling unsuccessful does not necessarily mean you are failing. Feeling lost does not necessarily mean you are going nowhere. Emotions can tell you that something deserves attention, but they cannot always tell you what that something means. Imagine opening social media and seeing someone your age announce an enormous career achievement. Immediately, your stomach tightens. Your mind says, they're so far ahead of me. Normally, the next step is automatic. You begin reviewing everything you haven't accomplished. But try something different. Pause. Ask, what exactly am I comparing? Maybe you are comparing their biggest professional achievement with your entire life. Maybe you're comparing their public moment with your private uncertainty. Maybe you're comparing their strongest category with the category where you currently feel weakest. The comparison feels objective, but it isn't. You selected the scoreboard, and you can select another one. Instead of asking how your income compares with theirs, ask whether you manage your money better than you did 2 years ago. Instead of asking whether your career looks impressive enough, ask whether you're developing useful skills. Instead of asking whether everyone else has found love, ask whether you're becoming capable of building a healthy relationship when one arrives. Instead of asking whether you own enough, ask whether what you own actually improves your life. This is not lowering your standards. It is replacing borrowed measurements with useful ones. Because there is a difference between comparison that teaches and comparison that condemns. Healthy comparison says, that person has something I admire. What can I learn? Unhealthy comparison says, that person has something I don't. Therefore, something is wrong with me. One creates information. The other creates identity. The second practice is to examine your invisible deadlines. Take one sentence that frequently bothers you. I should have achieved more by now. Then become specific. What exactly should you have achieved? By what age? And who decided that? Sometimes you will discover that the deadline came from your family. Sometimes from your culture. Sometimes from the people around you. Sometimes from a younger version of yourself who had almost no understanding of how complicated adult life would become. You are allowed to update the plan. That doesn't mean abandoning ambition. It means allowing reality to participate in your expectations. Perhaps at 20, you thought you'd become wealthy by 30. At 30, you understand money differently. Perhaps you thought you'd be married by 28. Then you learned that finding the right relationship matters more than meeting the correct birthday. Perhaps you imagined one career path. Then, experience taught you that you wanted something else. Changing the plan isn't necessarily failure. Sometimes changing the plan is evidence that you've been paying attention. There is a Stoic idea that becomes useful here. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself to return attention to the present action rather than becoming consumed by everything outside his control. Your life can only be acted upon here. Not 5 years ago, not inside someone else's timeline. Here. This sounds obvious, but notice how much psychological energy is spent negotiating with moments that no longer exist. I should have started earlier, maybe, but you didn't. I should have chosen differently, perhaps, but you didn't. I should have known, but you knew what you knew. The question is not whether the past could have been different. Of course it could. The useful question is, what does what I know now allow me to do next? That is where regret becomes wisdom. You extract the lesson without turning the mistake into your identity. Maybe you wasted 3 years. Then don't waste the 4th year punishing yourself for the first 3. Maybe you chose the wrong career. Then the lesson is not, I'm behind. The lesson might be, I now understand what kind of work I don't want. That knowledge has value. Maybe a relationship ended after 5 years. It can feel as though those years disappeared. But human experience is not a bank account where every relationship that ends becomes a total loss. Perhaps you learned boundaries, communication, what you need, what you cannot tolerate, how you behave when afraid, how deeply you can love. A chapter ending does not automatically make the chapter meaningless. And this leads to another important shift. Stop measuring life only by completed milestones. Some of the most important progress is almost invisible. Learning to regulate your emotions, becoming less reactive, building discipline, recovering from failure faster, choosing better friends, setting boundaries, learning how to spend time alone, becoming someone who can keep promises to themselves. None of these achievements photograph particularly well. There may be no announcement, no trophy, no dramatic before and after picture, but they quietly change almost every decision that follows. Think of a foundation beneath a building. Nobody walks past a skyscraper and compliments the concrete buried underground. But without it, everything visible becomes fragile. Perhaps some periods of life are like that. From the outside, very little appears to be happening. You are learning, recovering, saving, rebuilding, changing your standards, understanding yourself. It can look like stagnation, until suddenly, the foundation supports something that would have collapsed without those years. This doesn't mean waiting passively forever. There is a difference between patience and avoidance. If you know what matters and continually refuse to act, telling yourself, everyone has their own timeline, can become another excuse. Your timeline is your own, but it is still moving. You do not need panic. You do need participation. Choose a direction, then create evidence that you're moving. Read 10 pages. Save a small amount. Send the application. Take the course. Have the conversation. Walk for 30 minutes. Make the first version. Ask for help. One small action may look insignificant compared with someone else's 10-year achievement, but you are not living their 10 years today. You are living this day. And perhaps that is the comparison worth making. Not you versus them. Not your age versus their age. Not your chapter 3 versus their chapter 12. But you today versus the direction you chose yesterday. Are you moving toward what matters, even slowly? If the answer is yes, perhaps you're not behind. You're simply on the road. And if the answer is no, that is not a reason to condemn yourself. It is information. Change direction. Take the next step. Then repeat. Because there may never be a moment when everyone around you is at exactly the same stage. Someone will always earn more. Someone will marry earlier. Someone will discover their purpose younger. Someone will become successful faster. And somewhere, someone may be looking at your life and wondering why they haven't reached something you barely remember achieving. Comparison has no natural finish line. So eventually, you have to create one. Not a finish line based on age, not one based on status, not one based on applause, but a quieter standard. Am I building a life that increasingly reflects what I actually value? If you can answer yes more often over time, perhaps that is enough. You don't need to catch everyone. You don't need to explain your timeline. And you don't need to arrive at someone else's destination. You only need to stop standing still because you're ashamed of where you're starting. The years will pass either way. The question is not whether you started late. The question is what you will do with the time that is still yours.